All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started with my portion. So we're going to go over today for the agenda, we're going to go over Encore pre-award setup. So I know everybody might be a little bit more familiar with the post-award, after studies activated, the invoicing and items. That's what we're building a curriculum with Encore Advara to be able to send out so we can do it in a uniform manner. However, what CRH handles is the initial study startup, the pre-award setup in Encore. So that's handled by our financials team and our budget entry team. But I wanted to bring everybody into what that looks like, what the different indicators activate within the system, and how we can personalize it, customize it for what your team needs. So the first thing I'm going to do is just show everybody how to navigate to this. Now, everybody should be able to at least have read-only or view access for this console. You would go to Menu, and then you go to Financials, and then you go to Financials Console. So that's how you navigate to the screen I'm about to show you for any study that you're currently in. Once you're in the console, if you weren't already in the study from the PC console, you can always search for a protocol over on the side, and it will pull it up. As you can see, there's a number of different elements of information here at the top. Often we'll be able to put the project number or the corresponding U-first number here under contract number. This particular one doesn't have it included, but if you do see that number up here, that's what it correlates to. We have the typical stuff that you'll see in here, the short title, the sponsor, all of those elements. The first page that we always have to set up, otherwise we can't go any further with the financial build, is the parameters page. And this kind of sets the tone for the study. It has the overarching amounts in it, which is what we call rate base. We currently have 4 rate bases available, but we're only utilizing 1. So this is something that we will optimize when we upgrade Encore, is to remove additional rate bases if they're not being utilized. Because currently every build we do uses cost, which is just a form of the charge master where we put that information in there. If we did have varying amounts of the charge master that were kept up to date, we'd be able to pull in the dollar amounts from different ones. But because each study usually has different negotiated amounts, it wouldn't be particularly helpful. Then we have default sponsor. The default sponsor is always going to be the primary sponsor, and this is utilized in cases where you may have a CRO who's handling the invoicing, and it's not necessarily sponsored directly. Default sponsor will almost always be represented here as the main sponsor that you'll see on the upper corner. However, you'll be able to see down here that we do have the CRO called out. So when we have billable items, we can make sure that we're addressing them to the appropriate party. The next thing we look for is the payments that are being sent if there's withholding that's removed for them. So in most cases, when there is withholding, it's that 10%. So even though it's owed to us, they're holding it back to the end to make sure that we fulfill our end of the contract. And we can indicate what items the withholding applies to. Typically, in the contracts I've seen, it's just the subject milestones. So the things that are triggered automatically from EDC entry that indicate a visit has been completed per schedule, and they withhold 10% of that payment. Now, if they are withholding things like the IRB fees, the startup fees, monitoring visits, that would be in the protocol related, and we would check that box. And if they were withholding things that were strictly invoiceable, so like additional physical exams or a CT scan that only happens if it's clinically indicated, those items, that would be in the pass-throughs. So we would select that box. Inflation multiplier. I have seen this on 0 of the budgets I've entered so far, but if for some reason they do indicate that they give us a certain amount for inflation each year, this is where we can place that in. Now, this study was set up with an overhead rate. But future studies, ones that we are currently entering now, will have an indirect rate. Now, as far as Encore works, the overhead and indirect show up the same on invoices. They apply the same. The only difference, and the reason we've made the switch, is that with indirects, we can individualize, customize which items receive that charge. So I don't know if anybody's looked at invoices or the way budgets were entered before, but what we would have to do if overhead was included in an amount is we would have to go in, we would have to calculate it divided by 1.3. If it's the overhead rate was 30%, we would divide it by 1.3 and then put in that other number. so that when it dropped for an invoice and the 30% was added in, it met what the contract said. This often led to a couple of cents being off. It led to discrepancies in invoices going out and sponsors not being able to match the exact amount. And it created a lot of extra work for us on the back end calculating all these things out, especially if the contract is given to us as a PDF and we're not able just to use the Excel spreadsheet and have a single calculation there. So in using the indirect rate, we can select, will it apply to protocol related items like your startup, or is overhead already included in those? Subject related items, so individual procedures that are being billed out that are subject related, so like a reconsent or a patient stipend that only occurs if it's an unscheduled visit. Will it occur for milestones, so those automatic payments that we receive? And will it apply to the overall charge, single cumulative for the entire study? Typically, we've seen that the indirect rate applies to subject related because when we get those dollar amounts for procedures, they often don't already include overhead. And when you look at the grid, it'll be a line at the bottom that says like their overhead is this much, and then the two are added here. So it aligns better. But this is why you may have gone from seeing numbers that don't match contracts in like the protocol related or the milestones tab, that now they do match exactly what they say. And that's because we can choose individual items to pull those into. Okay, the next thing here that we fill out is screen failure information, and we take this directly from the contract. Typically, there's a ratio that will be provided if it's called out. So if screen failures are specifically called out, they'll say like they'll pay for one screen failure for every two patients that are enrolled that are eligible. So we place this eligibility criteria here as far as the ratio. This will be your not eligible patients to eligible patients. We have to indicate an enrollment status. So is it just that the patients are marked as eligible in the CRA console, or do they actually have to be on study and on treatment before they can be counted towards patients that are enrolled? Or do they have to complete the entire study and then that counts as one enrolled patient? 99% of the times when we set this up, it's just as long as the patient is marked as eligible, they count towards the enrolled number in this ratio. There's also some contracts that we've seen that they say they'll only pay after the first 3 screen failures, or they'll only pay after the first 5 screen failures, and then they'll start reimbursing us, especially for high enrolling studies. In those cases, we indicate what the first invoiceable screen failure is. And then we also list the maximum number of screen failures if that's applicable for it. So if they say, look, we're paying you for 10 screen failures and that's it, we're able to indicate this here so they don't continue to drop for invoicing. The other thing, and I haven't seen this nearly as often, is the first invoiceable outside safety report. I haven't seen really any restrictions on those, so the IND reports or the safety reports. And most of the time, what you'll see here is the maximum invoiceable. We put, nearly 1,000 in here. If you get over 1,000 outside safety reports, we can always increase that number. But I would also worry about what's going on with that trial. And then milestone invoiceable prerequisite, it has to be marked as occurred. So that's the lowest threshold to be able to send out for a visit. If your sponsor, for some reason, is saying, like, we have to have come, we have to have monitored this visit, make sure it's all good, and marked it as such before we will pay you for it, then we can indicate that they have to be marked as monitored prior to dropping for invoicing. So we have those options there. This next section is going to be modified in the coming days, but what it allows us to do, and what most of you have probably already received, is send out those invoicing reminders to say, hey, please make sure that you've reviewed any of the pass-through items, any of the protocol-related items, and that they have dropped appropriately. Because we do understand that a lot of people do have shadow systems that they use to track information. What we want to make sure is that your shadow system that you may be utilizing matches what we have. So when we generate those invoices and have them sent out, they're as complete as possible. And we hopefully meet the expectations without having a back and forth. In past setups, we've had information in here as far as what is CRA console triggered. The difficulty is with every amendment, with every change to studies, with every alteration, this would have to be updated, revised, put in there. And sometimes there's ones that instead of going to a re-going to a financial build, they go straight to contracting and get executed. So sometimes we're skipped in that process. The solution for this is to change this language. Instead of having the specifics in the contract as far as what's CRA console triggered, just say, please review your CRA console triggered items, just in general, and make sure that they're all up to date. That way we don't have anything outdated in here that you guys don't have to necessarily respond to the emails that you're receiving. Instead, you go into Encore and you just look and compare, make sure those are up to date, and that we can reduce the number of communications that everybody is receiving. The next section that we'll fill out is the remit section, which is where are payments going to be sent to? And it's always going to be this University of Florida lockbox. It's an address that's in New York. I believe it's for Chase Bank, but this is where all of the payments should be sent to. And so when the invoices are generated, that information is at the top of the invoice and the sponsor knows where to send any checks. The final portion that gets taken care of here is the bill to address. So it's where is this supposed to be sent when the invoice is generated? It lets us know that we have this information correct since we take it directly from the contract. So this is all the information that gets put onto the parameters page. I'll stop here. Does anybody have any questions they want me to address in this section now? Okay. I don't see anything coming through on chat, and I trust Jeremy, you'll let me know if there is anything that pops up. Okay, the next section that we handle is the protocol related field. I am too in the training environment, just so everybody knows, you can tell by the training in the section here. So anybody who might be worried that the study is being altered, don't worry about that. I have it taken care of. We're in the training environment. The protocol related section handles things that are directly a result of the protocol and not the subject individually. So things like consents, CT scans, those are linked to an individual patient in the protocol. Protocol related items are the study overall. So this will be your study startup. This will be your IRB. This will be your pharmacy charges. Here there's a protocol feasibility study startup. These charges are in here. So I'm going to take you through what the screen looks up, and we'll start with just study startup to go through the different elements. The event codes are what they are in our Charge Master and Encore. They probably won't mean a lot to your team, but I have worked to try and update the Charge Master so that the way that you're seeing these makes more sense for future builds. So I've structured it so that the CRH fees are at the immediate top. You'll see those first thing at the top. You'll see them included in your budget, the amount that's in there. Those are at the top. The next thing you'll see is any of the startup fees. So whether it's IDS, whether it is a study startup, whether it's regulatory, all of those will be the next. After that, you'll have your annual or recurring fees. Anything tied to like a continuing review or study startup date where it happens at the 13th month, you'll see those fees there. After that, you'll see your ad hoc fees. So things like monitoring visits, serious adverse events, which I'll talk about. I know those are tied to an individual patient, but I'll tell you why they're on the protocol related. If there is a site monitor change, if IDS has like after hours staff for receiving any manual documentation fees, those ad hoc ones will be listed next. And then the final portion is going to be your closeout fees. So I tried to structure it so it's kind of the life of the study as you would expect to see these fees occurring. This event description is the general category that the fee is under. So study startup is it's a very broad term, and you may see these repeat. So there might be two different study startups that are pulled in there. Where we get the additional information on them is the comments. Both the event description and the comments will pull into any invoices. So that's why we try to provide as much information as possible in the comments portion. The next sections are going to be what the charge master has indicated should be the amount. So retail or research. So if the charge master is updated, which we are working on getting it up to date, these will be the suggested amounts or the amounts that are incurred at UF as kind of a standard. Now, that's not to say your contract doesn't say something different. So the negotiated amount here is the amount that is reflected in your contract. And as I said, because we're now using the indirect rate and not the overhead rate, this should match identical to your contract. Variable. If the variable button is selected, it means that this charge can reoccur multiple times. So it's not just added to one invoice, it's been billed and it's grayed out. As you can see here, down here, this medical records fee, search fee, can be billed multiple times. So they have it in there as a variable charge. They also have it in here as a $0 charge. What that allows us to do is if it's a direct pass-through, like they're reimbursing us variable amounts, whether it's reimbursement for a medication or whether it's a travel reimbursement or a training reimbursement, when this drops, we'll notice that that's a $0 charge and we'll look at the backup and be able to add that amount in there. So that's why you may see a $0 charge on here. The next column deals with inflation, if there's an inflation modifier that applies to it. This one, there's not an inflation modifier on the study. We're not going to hang up that. Indirect. Here is where I'm able to indicate if this individual item, I need to have it add indirect cost when it's adding it to the invoice or whether it's already included in the dollar amount that we have. Because I would imagine this medical record search fee is a pass-through plus indirect or plus overhead, I would put here that the indirect fee is going to apply in this case. So you can just add in whatever the amount that is the pass-through amount, and when it drops for invoicing, it's automatically going to add that 30%. The nice thing here is I can individually call out that that's just a medical record search fee specific. It's not going to add it to all the other fees that may have already had it included. That's another thing there. And then the last column here just allows us to delete any of these protocol events that may not be applicable any longer. Now you'll notice that some of these have grayed out boxes and some of these I am able to modify. If the charge has already been added to an invoice, we are no longer able to go in and modify it for record keeping purposes. So what we do in those cases is we would open the charge and we would make it no longer active. And then if we needed to change the dollar amount, we'd be able to add another one and have a different dollar amount and have that one be active. But that way we have a full record of what may have been charged during the study, why it was charged at a different rate than the contract currently has, what invoice it's been attached to. Okay, so that is the protocol related elements. I will pause here. Oh, I am sorry. I did not address the serious adverse events item. So we add serious adverse events to the protocol related page with what you guys may know as a CRA console trigger. So when you go into the CRA console, you're able to add in that it has occurred. The reason for that is if you document SAEs in the CRA console under the form that says SAEs and looks very attractive, if you do not put the complete amount of information that is required, then it will not drop for billing. It will hold it in a state of like purgatory where it's pending. And so in order to reduce double documentation and burden and additional stuff, we added it to financial events because I can't imagine that teams are using Encore to track these items. I imagine you guys have an SAE log or you have something in Epic where you're tracking SAEs, potentially something in the EDC that you're downloading for your records. If you do want to use Encore to track SAEs and you're going to enter all of the information, the start, the severity, the resolution, all of that stuff, I'm happy to take you through that. But it was elected that this wasn't the main way that study teams were tracking SAEs, and therefore we wanted to make it easier to record those financially. And so we have them usually in this financials event here. This is where it would show up on your study build. So moving forward, this is where they're all held. It's just under financial events in the CRA console. The other nice thing about having it in the CRA console is that you can have multiple events. So if you have a patient or you have multiple patients who have had SAEs and you're recording all 4 of those at one time, we just ask that you put the count in here, and then in the comments, you put the backup that you want to show on the invoice, because the sponsor is probably going to have questions about that. So that is why we're doing the SAEs, so that they're not tied to a single patient, but instead are in this console here. Are there any questions in protocol related as far as what we're doing or why we're building things out the way that we are?
Hey Claire, it's Megan Wickman. I just had a question in these where you just were in the
Yes.
CRA console for financial events, I think it was. Would you like if we have a monitoring visit over 2 days, but like we get paid each day, would you prefer us to say like, okay, one on 8/21 and 8/22, or just put count two?
You can put count two, and then
Okay.
you can say that the first date that it occurred,
Okay.
as long as they're like sequential, as long as they're
Yeah.
touching each other essentially in date.
Hmm.
Um, and that's been a way that we've been trying to reduce burden too, because that way you don't have to enter each of them individually.
Okay. I just didn't know which way you guys preferred. Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. The other thing that I'll address is these triggers we have in here. Um, so these triggers are indicated when the fees will drop. Now, if your study has something where it's like at contract execution, you can drop and bill for these fees, we can modify them. But most of the time, we're tying these to IRB reviews, especially for initial startup fees. So it's when the initial review is uploaded, then it drops for a charge. And then in the past, so older studies, older builds, for annual charges, you will see something called date-based triggers. Now, the issue is with these date-based triggers that, and this study was actually built in 2024, but it's probably at a 13-month mark, which is why you're seeing it start in the future. But if the study is marked as IRB study closure, it's closed out in the system, it's marked as suspended or abandoned, whatever, these will still drop for invoicing, and then you or our team will still be notified that there are things that are outstanding for the study. It will continue to look like the sponsor is owing us money despite the study being closed. So we have now gotten into the process of tying things instead to continuing reviews, because the idea is that the continuing review should occur annually and that it's not going to occur if the study's already closed out. So it won't continue to drop those charges. So older studies, you will see these date-based triggers. In fact, some of them go for 30 years, which is pretty impressive for any study length. But newer studies, you will instead see it tied to continuing review. Now, if for some reason your study doesn't have continuing reviews, there's some issue with that, just let us know. We can tie it to other things. We can tie it to CRA trigger. We can have no trigger on it and just drop it when it's requested. We can do the date-based triggers, but really we probably wouldn't do it for more than 5 years. So then we just need to make sure if there's 5 years of, if the study goes beyond 5 years, that we extend that. And that would be a request that you would submit to CRH as an ASRF. Um, there's other ways that we're able to do it, but I just wanted to explain the logic and setup here. We also have IRB study closure for all of the closeout costs. However, I know there's been study situations in which the pharmacy closes out, but patients are still on the study, so the IRB is still open, but they want to pay out the pharmacy. We're happy to change the trigger, drop it manually, or tie it to the CRA console so you can drop it when you're ready. You just got to let us know that, and we can customize that for you. All right. Any additional questions in this sense?
Claire, I don't have a question, but I want to mention that with the IRB triggers, it's important to keep in mind um, those are only as good as how the regulatory coordinator is recording them. So, for example, if they record a full review as exempt, so right now this one that you have up is safe, right? Because we have all three choices, right? But what we found is sometimes that this can create some invoicing questions, if you will, like, is this one really invoiceable or, so just for any of those folks out there, just keep that in
That's a
mind.
good point. That's a good point. Yeah. So when we build this, we put all three types of reviews. The only one that I don't include is non-human reviews, because if you're recording something as non-human in Encore currently, we don't have any non-human studies. We don't have any animal studies in here. Um, But yes, exactly. So if something looks like it should have triggered and it hasn't, this is one of the first things we investigate and look at is this set up appropriately? Has the IRB documentation been up there. There are circumstances where you're talking about like amendments, where it may be an IRB amendment, but it's not necessarily a contract amendment, or there's a fee for submitting documentation to the IRB, even though it didn't go through a full review, anything like that. Those we can also tie to like a CRA console trigger. So you can just let us know that they happened, even if the documentation doesn't match what the trigger may say. So that's a good point. Thank you, David. Okay. Anything else in the protocol related that anybody wants to know? Any questions? And I'll move on to the next section. Okay. Next section is going to be subject related. Now, this is going to be built based off the calendar procedures that you see. And this is why you may see a calendar that has a whole bunch of extra procedures that you're like, I don't see these on the schedule of events in the protocol. But because they're tied to something in the budget, they need to be included as something that may be recorded. In here, you'll see, like I said, all of these procedures. You may also expand it, and this one doesn't have any linked to it, but if it had a event, like a CPT code attached to it, you may see that in here as well. You'll see the procedure item itself. You'll see the retail and research rate if that's included in the charge master. As you can see here, it hasn't been for these procedures. Then you'll see the negotiated amount. So this is the amount in the contract that the sponsor says they're willing to pay you for something. And then you'll see charge type. Charge type is what allows us to know, should this be included in the milestone payment that we're receiving for the visit, or is this something that needs to be separately invoiceable and isn't included in the payment that we may receive for the visits that it's attached to. So with medical history here, you can see there's a number of visits it's included in. However, it had M/P on it. M is milestone, meaning it's included in the amount. We don't have to call it out separately. It doesn't have to be separately billed. P means it's a pass-through item. And pass-through items indicate that they do have to be billed separately. We have to call them out individually on the invoice, and it's in addition to the visit amount that we're receiving. So the other thing I'm showing here is that this particular procedure looks like it's a little bit complicated. I'm looking at what we call visit overrides, and it's saying at specific visits, it'll be billed one way. At other visits, it needs to be billed a different way. So here we have the optional enrollment visit. This will be charged $100, but it's included in the milestone payment. And it's also indicated that a study staff performs this, which is something we'll see for most of medical history. And it will be billed to the sponsor. This isn't a charge that should go out to patient's insurance. So we have all of that information here. Past this, the retrospective period, although it's being collected, we get no additional fees for it. And then we get down here to these optional home visits. Not only is this billed to the sponsor, but it's a pass-through item. So that pass-through item will drop as its own individual charge. It won't be just in the visit charge. It'll have a separate place. And then we have the dollar amount and the study staff performs. If you are looking at a budget or you're looking at this calendar of events and you see a blue check mark, that means these visit overrides are present. So that means what you're seeing initially does not apply across the board, and we need to dig a little deeper in to see how we can specify this information. This is especially applicable to things that have mixed designations. So something that at one time point is billed to the sponsor and at other time points is billed to patient's insurance, things that have different amounts. So on one day, it's $200. On another day, it didn't take you as long, so it's only $100. This is where you go. You should see this visit overrides thing at the top, and you will show you every single time that this procedure is listed. You can filter over here saying like you just want to see the ones that apply to a certain arm. You just want to see the ones that have a certain designation. You just want to see the ones that have a certain supporting designation. So this is the visit overrides function, which you can get to from the individual procedure. Okay, That being said, there's also a number of footnotes. Now, we have not been including as many footnotes in our calendars because I don't believe that they're being utilized as widely as we may have seen, and that this can be seen as clutter. Also, when there's future amendments, a lot of the changes are just footnotes. So, in order to expedite the process, if the footnotes aren't there and they're not being used, then we won't, and we don't include them, it goes through the process much quicker. Now, there are footnotes that you will almost always see. And those are the ones that are specific to UF and our builds. The first is this is a procedure that was added from the budget. So this is something that wasn't on the schedule of events in the protocol, but needs to be included because there's a dollar amount attached to it and needs to be built that way. Invoiceable, this is something that most of the time these are pass-throughs. This is something that if it happens outside of a regularly scheduled visit, it needs to be billed separately, and we need to make sure that's included as such. NA, so this is something that may apply to some people, may not apply to others, something like a pregnancy test. Like this applies to a woman of childbearing potential, but if you have a male that comes in, you need to remember to mark this NA for them. And then as needed. So this is something that's on the calendar that doesn't have any time points associated with it, but you can pull it into the visit if it's something that you've determined is needed in those. So that leads me to the unscheduled visit. In our current calendar builds, we have 7 optional unscheduled visits that are built with no procedures linked to them. We will have to have the coordinator add in the procedures that are completed at those visits. The reason that having dollar amounts attached to visits or to procedures, even if it's a milestone payment, because you're like, well, if it's already included in the milestone, why do I have to worry if the dollar amount is the same? Because when these are pulled into unscheduled visits, then we are able to calculate how much is owed for that unscheduled visit, and we're able to send out the appropriate invoice. That is for studies where the unscheduled visits are reimbursed based off the procedures completed. Now, in different situations, like it looks like this one here, has a flat rate that they pay you for unscheduled visits. It doesn't matter what you do with the unscheduled visit, they're giving you $320.77. Then we will add an unscheduled visit onto the calendar as a pass-through item. And you just pull that into the unscheduled visit that you have, and it'll drop that flat rate. So there's 2 different ways you'll see the unscheduled visits built, and it'll be dependent on your contract. And we can always help explain that at the time. But if you see an unscheduled visit procedure, that would be the only one that you would need to include in Encore in that unscheduled visit, because that would drop that flat rate. Are there any questions on what I went through here? I know it was very quick.
Claire, I just wanted, hi, this is Wendy. I just
Yeah.
wanted to confirm that no footnotes are updated during amendments. I was just told that recently, and I didn't know that.
Yes.
And they emailed me and they said they don't ever update footnotes for an amendment.
That's correct. Unless if there is a good case that's brought forward to us to do that, we can. But it like as standard procedure, we don't update footnotes. In fact, in our more recent builds, we haven't even been including ones from the protocol. But if there is something that the team feels like is essential and will impact the operation, we can go through and add it. I know it may be different on the Cancer Center side since they have their own calendars team, they're in their own MCA team, so I won't speak for them. But I can say on the academic health side, there would need to be a special case made for why the footnote needs to A, be included, or B, needs to be updated. And that has allowed us also to eliminate having to have things submitted if it's only a footnote change in a protocol. And we're able to NA the calendar tasks and move it through much quicker.
Hi, Claire, I have a question. This is Adrian.
Yes.
Thanks for giving the breakdown here. So specific to the amendments and what ultimately ends up showing as invoiceable, we do have some studies that they'll show up as invoiceable with the first version of the contract's expenses, right? And may not be pulling over the amended prices. So a lot of times we have to go backwards and look at timestamps to see exactly how is it that we should navigate, or some of these changes going to like help correct that discrepancy that we get from time to time.
Yeah, and I think that for us is something that's is something we're working to improve. When I go and I've looked at a lot of the issues that have been brought forward, there's two ways to be able to retroactively correct a calendar or to correct a calendar and budget because they're so intertwined. The first allows for certain elements to be corrected retroactively. But the things that cannot be changed for any retroactively entered charges are things like the charge type. So we can't take something that was a milestone and make it a pass through retroactively. So what we have been able to do in those cases is make modifications and then ask teams to re-enter or us to re-trigger those to drop at the new amounts. I will say that we have had some success in just changing the dollar amount and updating it retroactively, but that is something that's been a little more difficult to navigate overall. If there are specific cases, please just shoot me or shoot the hub an email, and we will work on it individually. In cases where it may not have been structured how it needed to be in the beginning, we've gone in and modified the dollar amounts to match what are needed in a corrective fashion, rather than make it go through the typical ASRF submission for a budget change. Does that address the question, or did I get off topic there?
No, no, I think it does. So, I mean, if because it seems like I have the ability to go in and edit an invoice, right? And I can change the direct and the
Yeah,
indirect dollar amounts, right? So, if I just take it upon myself to do that, as we've done before, how do I make sure that I can defend my action, right? If the system
yeah,
itself is not reflecting the
reflecting.
amendment, you know what I mean? So,
Exactly. And that's why I think it is so important to address it systemically rather than an ad hoc basis when you're
mhm.
actually sending out the invoice. Because you're absolutely correct. When you're sending out invoices, you can always change what's in there. You can always modify things. And in those cases, if you are sending out something that's discrepant with the system, I would just note that like per contract version due, item was updated and is reflected as such. So there should be comment boxes on the invoices as well if you're worried about kind of that paper trail element. But I would say the best course of action is to make sure that we correct the study for you so you don't have to do that in the future. So if it's an immediate thing, you're able to do that on the invoice, but please also let us know so we can improve it.
Okay, no, that gives me a path forward. I appreciate it.
No problem. Okay, I will also note anything that's pulled in as an additional procedure on a visit. So like let's say they're there for screening, but you needed to repeat vitals. And so there's an additional vitals you had to pull in, or they're there and they're being rescreened. And so you made an additional visit and you're pulling stuff in there. Those will show to us under a visit variation. So when you go to invoice out, we'll go through the visit variations very clearly in the curriculum, but anything that is in addition to how the calendar is initially built is captured. And again, that's why it's important that we have these dollar amounts in here because then we can determine what may need to be an additional charge to the sponsor, even if the visit was already compiled. So the dollar amount wasn't included in the milestone, but the visit was expected. How do we make sure we get that additional amount for what we were doing? And that will be under visit variations, and that will be in the post-award management section. The final element that we go through in our pre-award builds is milestones. So let's see if we can get this to work for me here. There we go. Milestones are the visits or the time points that you see on your calendar. Now, the first thing I'll address here is because this is an older calendar, was built old prior to our current processes, the milestones that are being captured are outside safety reports and SAEs. You should not see those on newer builds and newer calendars. These are ones that are captured from that CRA console under the SAE or OSR tabs. And like I said, they require additional information to actually drop these amounts. And because we were finding that study teams were saying, like, I've already entered the SAE 3 places. I don't want to then have to go give all the information to Encore. We eliminated these and we're triggering these from the protocol related. So newer builds you will not see these. What you will see is each of the visits that have been listed on the calendar, which is why we stress so much that we want everybody to review the calendar and be detailed with it, and how much we really appreciate the time that it does take teams to be able to do that. You will see here a total negotiated cost calculated. So this is the dollar amount based off the procedure costs and when they occur at these time points. So if you add up all the procedures at this visit, it adds up to $3,200, $15. But the contract here, you'll see, has 38 cents added to it. So this column, the total negotiated column, is the amount that the milestone will actually bill out for. So when we drop a milestone onto an invoice, this amount, the one on the right here, is the amount that will drop. And then because there's two sponsors on here, it indicates which sponsor should be paying. So if there's a situation where your CRO is handling the reimbursement for stipends, but the main sponsor is paying for everything else, we can split out those payments so it drops to the appropriate payer. And then here, we also have a column that indicates, does the sponsor require to be invoiced for these, or are these automatically dropping based off EDC entry? So it looks like with this study, it was set up that yes, the sponsor requires these to be added to an invoice. If there are milestones that have $0 amounts tied to them. So let's say there's a run-in period and you don't get paid for the run-in period. You may not see them on the milestones page here because we can select which milestones we pull in. 99% of the time we pull in all of the available visits because there's almost always a dollar amount attached to it. But if there's one that's missing, that most likely is why. And if that isn't the case and there is a dollar amount attached to it, please just let us know and we can confirm that. That is about as much time as I have for the summary of the pre-award build. Are there any additional questions?
Hi. Yes,
Yes.
I'm Liz Betty. I'm with Pulmonary. I have a quick question. So in this last page where you were talking about the total negotiated versus the total negotiated cost calculated, what can you infer when the total negotiated is less than the calculated?
Yeah.
For pretty much all of the visits.
Yeah. So in a lot of these cases, it's because there are procedures that are occurring at time points that aren't necessarily on the calendar. So a lot of times there are items, I'm trying to think of something, a specimen, the costs for shipping out specimens on dry ice. Usually that's not something that gets recorded by the coordinator for every visit. But we don't put it on the calendar. We don't make you check it in, but we make sure it's included in the amount that drops. Here also, you'll notice like the retrospective cohort. These are optional visits. So if we just made them optional and then you could say which of these apply to those optional visits, which procedures occurred, the calculated amount may vary, but we make sure we have the proper amount on the right-hand side. David, I don't know how it is for Cancer Center. I know you guys always get yours to match, but I have found difficulty making the calendar functional and then having these calculate out perfectly as well.
Yeah, we've definitely run into those issues. Sometimes I think that we just have to make concessions just to get things to add up, move some money from one place to another, maybe sometimes. But we normally don't run into this until the very end when we go to get everything to add up and realize that okay, there's something's not jiving here. So it's very rarely does it work out on the first try, but occasionally.
Yeah, I mean it's always difficult. There's also things like a sponsor will pay for half. They have a fee for a pregnancy test of maybe $100, but they only reimburse based off half of that for each milestone. But we put the $100 in there because if you pull it in as an additional procedure on an additional visit, they reimburse at that $100 amount versus the amount that they include in the milestone is only 50%. So there's just variability in there. As long as this column on the right-hand side, the total negotiated matches what's in the contract, we are good to go, and it's going to set appropriately for it's going to drop appropriately for invoicing. So as long as the subject related portion has everything in here with prices appropriately, and then the milestone, this far right column, has everything appropriately, and the calendar looks functional for your needs. We are secure and compliant with everything that we need to bill out.
Sounds like a good plan. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right, with that, I'm going to hand the mic over to Melissa Sykes for the Epic touch points in research. I can share these slides, Melissa, if that works for you.
Yes, thank you, Claire. So I don't know if anyone else is having VPN issues, but I'm having some connection issues. So Claire is gracious enough to share this. And as if you've not had enough going on with all of that Claire talked about, we're going to talk about research touch points in Epic, what's kind of expected, what needs to happen for a complete picture from Encore over to Epic. So we'll get into it, and I apologize, we won't be able to share any Epic screens. However, if you need some extra help at the end, or you need to reach out to us, we can set up some time and go through these step by step. All right, Claire, next slide, please. Okay, a couple things we're going to talk about is maintaining the research study record in Epic. Encore and Epic, of course, are connected, and we'll go through that. We're going to look at uploading informed consent documents into Epic. We're going to talk about research encounter linking and research order linking. Okay, study administrative record. What is that? That's where your study lives in Epic. So a study record must live in Epic before you can associate your patient enrollments to the study, before you can link encounters to the study, before you can link orders to the study. Your study record must exist in Epic. It's also necessary for billing to route to the research guarantor record or the research guarantor account. So as charges drop, that study record must live in Epic so those charges can route to your study. And of course, study records are mostly managed in Encore and interfaced into Epic. And I say mostly because I know we do still have some legacy studies out there. Okay, the study admin record, you might hear it referred to as the RSH record or just plain study record. But the study team is responsible for verifying, maintaining, and updating your study team users or your staff and your providers, so your PI. You're also required to update the study statement recipients. Who's going to receive that study statement each month? And I've kind of given some screenshots of what it looks like on the users and providers tab in the study research study maintenance, as well as the report grouper section, which is where we house that study statement recipient email address. All right, some key indicators that you may be having some user and provider issues. If your staff who is responsible for running that billing review report and they have 0 results on that report and there's no charges to be reviewed, that's a #1 indicator. Charges drop all the time. So if your Epic charge reviewer is saying, I've reviewed everything, but you're getting an email as a manager saying you haven't reviewed for your study, that's a key indicator. Probably the staff who is responsible for running that report isn't listed on your study record. If you're trying to open your study record in Epic and you can't, you're probably not listed as an user on your study record. If you can't see your participants' enrollment record, you might not be listed as a user. Also, if you access in Epic the users and providers tab and you see my little screenshot over there, those folks in red, they're inactive, and it tells you one or more users are inactive. Also, we do have an automated batch job that sends emails out that says, hey, your department might have inactive users and providers on this particular study. If you haven't received one, it either means you're good to go or we haven't set that up for your specific department. And if that's the case, we can look into doing that for you. All right, how do you update your users? Pretty easy. You manage that in Encore. So you're going to pull up your protocol in Encore. You're going to update your staff roles. there is a caveat for those folks. I say rare-ish that we manage directly in Epic, but I know there are a few. And I don't know if we have Jacksonville users on the line, but Jacksonville isn't fully implemented in Encore. So they more than often will update directly in Epic. But just this came to light on another meeting that I was on. If you go and update your users and your staff in Encore, that's not an automatic push for that study to move from Encore and those updates to move to Epic. You have to reach out to Encore support and say, hey, I need you to re-interface my study. I made some staff changes. Then it's a quick push, and then those staff roles will be updated. We can go. Yeah, thanks, Claire. Just as an FYI, not every staff role in Encore will be sent to Epic, only these 5. You've got your PI, of course, your primary and secondary study coordinators, your data managers, and your Epic charge reviewer. If you have a research assistant listed as a staff role, that is not a role that interfaces over to Epic. So you'll need to adjust that role if that person needs to be involved with Epic. A couple of requirements for those users and providers. Your staff roles that are going to interface, they must have an active Epic user account, and your PI must have an active provider account. They're 2 separate things. So the PIs generally, sometimes they don't even have an Epic account, but they need to have an active, it's what we call an SER record, and it's basically a provider record. So if something's going on with your PI, you can reach out to us, the Epic Research Support or Encore Support, and we can help get that set up for you. Okay, research statements. That's another area that you need to keep updated on your study admin record. Just a quick overview of statements. It's a single statement that gets emailed out on the 15th of every month. It includes professional charges and technical charges. It looks a little like that at the bottom. And those study statements are automatically emailed to the email addresses that are provided at study startup. So if somebody has a staff role change and it's not going to Claire, now it's going to go to Katie, we need to know that because, you know, we just don't know. So it's going to continue to go to the wrong person. Some key indicators, there's really only one. If you're not getting study statements, you haven't received an email on the 15th of the month and you're expecting charges, those emails come from the research billing team for Gainesville and then the research physician billing for JAX. So if you're not getting those, and a caveat for JAX, they go out on the 5th of the month. Gainesville goes out on the 15th. So if you're missing those, the next slide will tell us how we rectify that. It's a quick service request. We've got our new Avanti templates. So you log in, you choose the template of Epic All Other Services. It looks like that on the right. You're going to select the category of research, the study statement invoice recipient service. Just give us your OCR code, your study name. Tell us who we need to remove, who we need to add. There is a caveat. That character limit on that field, I believe, is 280. So if you have 5 emails and it's too long, you'll need to create a listserv to say, hey, these are the group of recipients, and then we can include that listserv email address. I know a lot of studies do that. If you have 1 or 2 or even 3, it's okay. But if you're going to have a lot, you'll need to create a listserv. Do we have any questions on the study admin record, study statement field, the users, providers, before I move on?
One quick question, Liz Betty again, pulmonary.
Sure.
If we update the staff for like the study, you said we have to notify someone Encore,
Yeah.
so that it can be reflected into Epic. Who's that person? Oh, just Encore support.
Yeah.
Okay,
Just a quick email to them and they will push that study on.
wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. If we have no other questions, we will move on to uploading informed consents. That's another Epic touch point that you guys need to be making sure that you do. Any participant that you enroll, a copy of the participant's informed consent must be uploaded and scanned into Epic. So once you scan it into Epic, it appears in the media tab as I see it. I think it says consent form IRB is how it will appear on as the line item, but it shows in that media tab. There's several ways you can get it into Epic. If you have access to an on-base scanner, like most UFP clinics, most units, hospital outpatient department areas, usually they'll have an on-base scanner. Study teams typically don't. It requires appropriate Epic access and permissions. You can use an on-base scanner to quickly upload that. So if you're in a clinic that has one, you're in the cancer center, you can say, hey, clinic rep, can you upload these? There's some requirements, which we'll talk about the tip sheet in a second, like your MRN and the study code. Things have to be on that for them to appropriately index that scan. The other way, again, you'll need some information on the top of that consent form. You can basically fax it over to HIM department, and that's the phone number. Really easy way to do it is to make sure you have a personal SHANS drive, UF Health or UF Health OneDrive. Most of you guys are likely UF employees, so it's not your UF personal drive. It has to be on the SHANS network. Our Epic research team does not manage that, so you'll have to place a help desk service request to ask for the technical services folks to create and map your personal drive. If you have that in place, uploading consents are easy breezy. It's just something that has to be done from a compliance standpoint to make sure that ICF is uploaded into the patient's chart. Again, timing constraints and of course my VPN constraint. I can't show it to you, but there are step-by-step instructions for all of these informations for uploading consent. If you can't link out, we're going to send out this document. If you can't link out to this, just reach out to Epic Research Support and we can give you a PDF copy. We can attach that. Some folks do have firewall issues getting to these tip sheets, so if you do, let us know. But the key indicator for being able to upload your own consent forms is to make sure you have a SHANS personal drive. And then the steps are laid out. You basically upload it. You need to have a PDF version of it, not a Word document. It has to be PDF. And then follow those steps and get those into Epic. And then we'll be good. Any questions on the consent before we move on to encounter linking? All right. So research encounter linking is another touch point in Epic. Study teams must ensure that all study-related encounters are linked to their study in Epic. For you to do that, your patient enrollment status has to live in Epic and it must be active. And if your encounter is, say, let's say today, that start date, your enrollment record the encounter has to live between the start date and the end date of your study. So you might receive a message that you can't link that. It's because either there's not an active enrollment status or it's outside of the start and end date. Encounters should be linked before the visit begins to ensure the patient and the study's billing routes appropriately. And you can proactively monitor your visits, your participants that are coming in for visits, and check their linking by using some Epic reporting tools that we have in place. These are the two reports. If you're an outpatient ambulatory appointment, whether you're at MedOnc or you're going to Hale Family Practice, you can run the appointment search for research study participants. The last upgrade, we had to recreate these reports. So this one is not entitled UF Research. So if you have that saved, it's probably gone and you'll need to search for the appointment search for research study participants. You can run that report, find your outpatient appointments and quickly link them. Inpatient or hospital outpatient appointments can be monitored and linked using, it's kind of the same variety of the report, but it's admission search for research study participants. It's basically looking for those inpatient hospital stays or those HOD encounters. And then it's kind of a click of a button. You highlight the appointment you want to link and you click link to study. The only other caveat, and patient timeline is a whole beast of its own. We're not really covering that today, but if you have a billing calendar or a timeline in place, you should be linking it to that specific time point. And when we send this out, I'm going to add a quick slide so it kind of gives you an overview of where do I look if I need help with that. And of course, if you need timeline training, you can reach out to us and we'll work on getting that set up for you.
All right, and I know there's a couple more slides here. I'm being told that the room is needed by a group of students. So we will distribute these out. Melissa, unless there's one last, any last comments you want to give on this, and we will address the remaining 5 slides at our next Hub Talk, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's totally fine. The only comment I have is if you have further questions after these go out, feel free to reach out to us. We can set up some one-on-one training. We can walk through it together, whatever you guys need.
Absolutely. And I'll make sure to distribute these slides with the contact information that's listed on them so that everybody can have that in there. But thank you so much. And I apologize. I know this has been your technical not best day. So I'm sorry to add to it. But sorry, everyone. We're not going to be able to take questions, but we will have this obviously recording available and you know how to reach us if there's anything else you want to add. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.